We're live, and we've caught our breath after a sensational draft night. I know that we had a Lamar Jackson false start, and then we still got to end the night on the great Lamar Jackson moment. Matt, I don't know if you saw Mike Freeman's column. An NFC scout said they're going to look back on how Jackson was evaluated and be ashamed, except for the Ravens. The Ravens have a lot of pride. But Matt Waldman here with me tonight. Cecil Lammy on assignment, Gene Bramwell on assignment, which is good because we'll get to frolic and dig in. RSP subscribers know that the post-draft RSP is coming. It's baking in the oven right now. You can smell the bread rising. We'll touch on some things that may give you a little hint of what's going to come out of the oven, and talk about the landing spots and how it changed our outlook. And Matt, do you feel like you've absorbed and processed everything we saw, not just Thursday night, Friday night, and a very interesting Saturday?
Yeah, to the point that I'm not sure I know what to do when I leave this office at this stage. I think I'm not fit for real life anymore.
Well, yeah, that's why they call it fantasy, right?
Right.
Let's start. Really, I'm going to let you decide where to start, and just tell me give me one player and landing spot and draft slot combination that you felt like changed your view of the player materially.
It's a good question. I think the draft spot, landing spot combination that changed materially was Christian Kirk with Arizona.
Yes.
I thought that one is I didn't know that Christian Kirk and Josh Rosen were buddies in high school and had hung out a lot on the all-star circuit and played together a lot and even talked about going to school together. So that you take that combination and then you combine the fact that that also Kurt Warner and Larry Fitzgerald used to come to Christian Kirk's games in high school because Kurt Warner's son was a teammate of Christian Kirk's. So he's known Larry Fitzgerald and they've kept in touch all this time. And then you throw in the fact that Mike McCoy, Mr. Denver Broncos, you're too smart for us and your offense is too complicated, despite the fact that somehow you dumbed it down for Tim Tebow and helped them be a playoff team. And every system. Now you've got the insatiable learner in Josh Rosen, who's partnered up with Christian Kirk, who knows Larry Fitzgerald, and that Sam Bradford's going to be in that quarterback room, who is pretty much Josh Rosen with injuries, right. And you take a look at this and you think, and Mike McCoy is already said to begin the year when he came in is that I don't know what offense we're going to use yet. I'm going to look at the talent that we have and that we acquire, and we're going to get them in camp a little bit, and I'm going to figure out what we're going to do with that team and mold the scheme to the talent. So you put all that together, and I think Christian Kirk already probably has enough of a rapport with Rosen that it's only going to get better. He has a rapport with Fitzgerald, so this is going to be like graduate school mentoring. And then on top of that, I have to think McCoy's going to look at Kirk and Fitzgerald and the dearth of talent at receiver that's there, or the guys who are all just young and unproven. Really, that's a better way to describe it. And go, I'm going to switch Kirk and Fitzgerald and alternate them from flanker to slot and use both those guys on a regular basis. And whether it's Bradford looking at Kirk like he's, Stephon Diggs and Fitzgerald is kind of like what Laquan Treadwell, owners like myself would love him to be, you end up in a situation where I think Kirk really shines year one. And I've been taking him in first round of drafts this year because of that.
Yes, and in fact, I moved Christian Kirk up to my number one receiver in this class for fantasy. Now, not into the top 8. I wouldn't take him over a running back who has a clear path to a 3-down job. I wouldn't take him over Lamar Jackson. It's another conversation. But I agree, and I didn't even know some of the peripheral stuff. And this is what you get with your post-draft RSP. These kinds of but this is important. I mean, folks, I'm going to address the camera and talk to the folks and not talk to you for a second, Matt. It's like, Matt Waldman is not a lightweight, and you're not going to bring up this stuff just to sound smart or have something to say when you don't have anything else to say. These things matter. because we see it like the space shuttle. It's that first aim of the trajectory, and then you stay on that trajectory. And what I liked about Christian Kirk with Josh Rosen is it just makes sense. And Mike McCoy, as you said, if he says, I'm going to tailor around the players I have, well, because of the Tim Tebow episode, he can do it. And it's not just Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. It's Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, and David Johnson. Give him those three guys and a quarterback, whether it's Bradford or Rosen, that can, again, take the scheme, the plays from the whiteboard to the field, the way that they're conceived, that you've got it. And Rosen's going to get the ball out of his hands quickly and make the right decision. And that means a lot of times throwing to Christian Kirk. And it's just going to grow. And I just threw Jarvis Landry out there, not as a direct comparison for Kirk, but as the kind of numbers we can see Kirk putting up by year 2 or year 3. 105, 110 catches, 1,100 yards. And Kirk isn't going to do a lot of damage downfield, but he's in a perfect situation. And I think you're right to target him because the wide receivers, let's say Kirk, Sutton, Miller, Washington. I just read today, by the way, that the Ravens wanted Washington. They really wanted Washington, and they wanted Mark Walton too. So the Steelers got there before. So this first tier of wide receivers, Anthony Miller, it's very difficult to separate. But the one, and I even on the clock could had one where I was on the clock at 202 in my rookie drafts. I could have taken Sutton, could have taken Miller, could have taken Washington, and just traded down. That's how close it is. But if Kirk would have been there, I wanted Kirk or Lamar Jackson. They went right before me. Not that people care about my team, but I think that is a clear take where I don't know that you could have maybe New England, but will New England's offense remain New England's offense 2, 3, 4 years from now? Because that's the thing. It's not for dynasty. Rosen and Kirk get to continue to grow together. As I said, though, it's all about the running backs. I think you're going to see a lot of rookie drafts where, and also I say Kirk ahead of DJ Moore. DJ Moore is in a good spot, but you've got Greg Olsen, you've got Christian McCaffrey. I think you're going to see Christian Kirk next year be the leading target in the Arizona pass offense. But the running backs, well, let's start, Matt. Let me take a step back and say, I certainly had it, and I know I wasn't alone, as a big 5 before the draft. And that's Barkley, Geis, Jones, Chubb, and Michelle. And that big 5 became a big 8 with Kerryon Johnson, Royce Freeman, and Rashad Penny all landing in spots where the draft capital and the situation and the skill set of the player, if Rashad Penny can learn to pass block, which maybe I'm bearing a lead there. But these are all the classic perfect dynasty situations where the road is paved to big opportunity. And we know at the running back position, as long as the situation is adequate, the numbers are going to come. As long as the talent's adequate. And then talent can add value to those touches, but we're looking for opportunity. We're looking for volume. So did you have it as a big 5 or roughly big 5 and seeing those 3 running backs fall into those spots? Do you see it roughly how I described, or would you say, not so fast, let me add something to alter the picture?
It was about the same. I mean, for me, it was Barkley and Chubb and Geis, Royce Freeman and Kerryon Johnson with Michelle kind of tightly on the periphery, and we'd see what would happen with guys like Jones and Penny possibly. And so then when Jones and Penny got drafted as high as they did, yeah, it became a big 8 for me, and they're my top tier. So when you look at this particular scenario, it's funny because the worry for me was Barkley would wind up on a team that might try and use a lot of inside runs. He can run inside, but it's not the thing that I'd like to see him as kind of the primary, most frequent type of running that he does. And the fact that the Giants are an outside zone team, or at least that's what Pat Shurmur did last year in Minnesota. They ran more outside zone of their run plays than any team in the NFL last year in Minnesota. So you can think about what Minnesota's offense did. And Barkley likes to head outside first and see if he can cut it back inside or reverse his field. And if he's starting out bouncing outside, it's a better thing if you ask me. So I would rather him do that. And then also it sets up the screen game and sets up the swing passes, and Barkley's good in that regard. So that's a nice setup. And, I'd love to talk a little bit more about Geis in terms of what happened to him and just kind of some theories and thoughts there. And I'll mention
he
that
likes to play video games. Really,
Yeah.
that's the best. That's the best thing of an explanation that's come out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will add a little more to that. Before I get to it, I will say that Freeman, Freeman's been a favorite of mine. I've liked him. But he was a tier below like Barkley, Chubb and Geis, and now that he's basically the competition he has are guys that if he doesn't beat them, he's going to disappoint this summer. I mean, he's got it. I mean, unless Booker just like completely turns his game around, this is Freeman's job to lose easily. And I think he's in a position to have a really strong year. But I loved the Michelle look, and it was kind of funny because somebody asked me for a comparison on Twitter, and I said I'm waiting for Bill Belichick to one day say that Sony Michel reminds him of Robert Edwards, and Lance Zierlein told me he was jealous of the comparison. But that's kind of what Michel I think has to offer there. But getting back to Geis, I think what happened here is there's two schools of thought. The NFL, what they said was he missed meetings, he missed flights, he fired an agent, he was argumentative. He didn't seem invested, and that sounded the alarm for them. And then you have the whole, rumor of what happened at LSU that no one knows anything about and nothing was reported, and LSU vigorously denied it. And you have guys who's never had any issues with drinking, smoking, or getting in any sort of trouble. And so you can look at it from this way: is Geis an LSU line, or is the NFL line? And I'll say, well, if you know anything about whistleblowing behavior and how, companies and groups of people retaliate against whistleblowers, then you could see what happened at the combine with Geis saying that, some teams asked him inappropriate questions like they did with Des Bryant. And you can imagine that there were some angry teams out there who did that and decided, well, we're going to float some rumors out there and see if his name, if his stock drops a little bit, it'll cost him some money, teach him a lesson. And I can see how that would happen. And the NFL has enough warts that I tend to believe that more than anything. But the thing that I do want to bring up that is a salient point, if it were made true, if it's true that Darius Geis missed flights and it was his responsibility in however the logistics went, or that he was late to meetings, regardless of all the craziness that we can criticize the NFL for, the one thing that they rightfully cannot stand and do not deal with is being tardy or missing flights.
Jonas Gray, right? 4 touchdowns.
Listen, Ryan Riddle told me that everyone thinks about the Randy Moss trade and Adelius Thomas getting cut and they talk about the restaurant in Minnesota and all the different things that happened there. But he said the truth of the matter is that everybody in the league knows that Randy Moss got traded because he was late to a meeting, he and Adelius Thomas, and it was during a snowstorm, and they were the only ones that didn't get there on time. And the team was like, look, this is the weather in New England. You have to be prepared for it. You don't come late to meetings in the NFL. And so, when you look at it from that perspective, if Geis actually was late to that kind of stuff, I could see why teams dropped him down boards, because they do not tolerate that at all. So if we start to hear issues about him being late and that kind of thing, I would be more alarmed in redraft leagues right now. I would start dropping him. But right now, he's my number 2 back on the board. I don't have any issues with him at all in that regard.
Agree. Number 2. It wasn't even, I didn't have to think about it. He's number 2 before the draft, number 2 after the draft. And if he had dropped to the 3rd day of the draft, maybe it would have given me pause. But Washington, and they did trade down. They wanted Kerryon Johnson. Detroit traded up ahead of them and got Johnson, and then they traded down and still got Geis, but they still spent a late 2nd round pick on him. You know, it isn't like, I mean, it's still a valuable pick. It's still, when you take a running back in the second round, he's going to be your starter. I know Chris Thompson is there right now, but talent
And
creates opportunity. Go ahead.
and I mean, look, I've kind of lost my belief in the Gruden brothers. I think that the more we watch them, the more they wear on players. I think that's why they get veterans, because veterans know how to basically give back whatever it is that the coach gives, and they kind of have their guys in this regard. But it's a situation where I think they wear on people's nerves, and they're kind of looking at it like, well, there's more players where that came from. Gruden, John Gruden, based on what he did in this draft, you can see that, this whole offseason was about acquiring veterans, guys who could probably take him yelling at them, and not losing their confidence. I think that's kind of more what he wanted to do there. Whether it's going to work out or not is another question. But I think Jay Gruden, he's run through so many running backs, and some of them had some talent, some of them got hurt, that hopefully Geis is the type of guy that this is going to work out well with, because Washington doesn't have a good reputation in terms of its ownership, its coaching staff, its management overall. And if they do some crazy stuff, that would be my only concern with Geis. And to be honest with you, there are drafts that I'm picking Nick Chubb second over Geis, just because I do think Nick Chubb's the most talented player in the draft. But at the same time, I know that I may have to wait a year or half a year for Chubb to get in the lineup.
And Carlos Hyde is not Latavius Murray. He should be a better obstacle than Latavius Murray was. And Duke Johnson, and I mean, I shouldn't say Duke Johnson's not Jerick McKinnon, because Jerick McKinnon is one of the most valuable running backs in fantasy football right now. But Duke Johnson's not going to go away in that offense. Not if Todd Haley is reasonable.
But let's mention something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Todd Haley, he had Le'Veon Bell. He had Jamal Charles. First thing he says to Chubb after on the phone call, when they handed the phone off to him, he goes, I like backs who can break it from anywhere. And he goes, you are my kind of guy, and when you think about when Todd Haley has coached a team or been a coordinator of a team, he's had bell cow backs. And Duke Johnson's contract is over at the end of this year. So maybe this year Duke Johnson isn't going away. Maybe this year Carlos Hyde isn't going away. But if Nick Chubb blows them away in pass protection early in camp and just looks like the guy that I've seen on a regular basis, it will be over. Even though I agree with you, neither of those guys normally would go away easily.
Yeah, this year, whether it's Nick Chubb or Geis, or maybe Sony Michel does have a bit of a limited ceiling because of the Patriots offense. And the Patriots, by the way, weren't ready apparently to trade down from 31. If Taven Bryan had fallen to 31, the Chargers were going to trade back up. Kyle Posey wrote the access he got, the information he got, was to show you the way the machinations go in a draft room. War room was fantastic. But Sony Michel, I feel like people were overthinking a little bit. We've been through this. Yes, the Patriots will divide up their backfield, but it's the most productive backfield in the league. You have someone like Sony Michel. They invested a first-round pick in him. When was the last time the Patriots spent a first-round pick on a running back? I can't even.
Robert Edwards, I think.
Yeah,
maybe. I don't even know if he was a first-round pick, but he was their last big-time guy until they, other than acquiring Corey Dillon when he was old.
Right. So the big question here, all these guys are going to get a chance to have Kerryon Johnson, Royce Freeman, as big a role as they earned, Ronald Jones. And I actually think if we were strictly talking about those running backs 2 through 8, Jones might have gained the most value of them all during the draft, because he has the least competition. I love Peyton Barber, but he has the least competition. And he's in an offense with both of those tight ends, Chris Godwin, Deshaun Jackson, Mike Evans, and Jameis Winston, an aggressive passer, that it's going to create, if it's done competently, the lanes for him to show everybody why he had those Jamal Charles comparisons. And what I also love is he pulled up during his who cares? I know how fast Ronald Jones is. I can just watch him. He doesn't have to finish a 40. And Tampa Bay felt that way too. Let's talk about Rashad Penny, though, because Matt, I saw, and I don't want to ask you to give away too much of the post-draft RSB, but I saw Rashad Penny in early rookie draft rankings, third, fourth, fifth. That made it easy. No, I'm not going to take Rashad Penny that high, and I feel confident telling people look, there's a range of outcomes. I'm not saying I'm going to be right, but I feel comfortable saying that if you have to spend a top 6 pick on Rashad Penny, don't take another running back. And I know Seattle they got DJ Fluker. They took one of the best blocking tight ends, and they got Dwayne Brown now, so they have a real left tackle. But and Tom Cable, which apparently now Tom Cable was the problem, not the solution. But I just don't see how you can turn around a running game that quickly. And it was abysmal. It was the worst running game. Matt, I don't even think that Seattle was the worst running game last year. I think Seattle had one of the worst running games we've seen in the last 5 years, last 10 years. I mean, what do they have? Didn't they have like a 0.0 yards per attempt in carry in the red zone? I think that's why Jimmy Graham had all those touchdowns, because they just couldn't even run the ball in the red zone. Also, I think objectively, there are some things we can get into eye of the beholder. Of all these 8 backs, Rashad Penny was the worst at pass blocking. And yeah, he said he needs to work on it, but he was the worst. That doesn't sound like a recipe. Maybe if Rashad Penny as a runner was on the level of a Chubb or a Geis, where you say he's so talented that they're going to overlook that. He's not that good. Am I overstating this? Or do you think there are more paths to Penny being worth that top 5 or 6 pick in a year or two?
Maybe, but I'm not taking the chance either, because like the arguments you made with Jones, I was thinking of as a counter as like, well, this offensive line's got to get better in Tampa. There's signs of life there, but it still has to get better. And when you look at Seattle, I'm not going to totally write off them turning around their line, because they did get rid of Cable. Obviously, that didn't work. Jimmy Graham can't block worth a flip, so we know that he's gone, that whatever tight end they're putting in there regularly is going to be a blocker, I would hope. And if it's not Disley, it's going to be Vanette, and Vanette can block. He was at Ohio State for for God's sakes, because this is a, you block at Ohio State as a tight end for the run game. So you're going to get that. And then on top of it, they did spend some capital on acquiring a good guard. They have a decent center. They needed the guard Fluker. So Pochik and Fluker and Brown, that's not bad with a tight end, could be good. But my thought was this: so what if you've got, so that all comes together? That's great. How much better is Rashad Penny than Mike Davis? How much better is Chris Carson or CJ Prosise? CJ Prosise looked good before he got hurt. So when I look at the fact that this team has like a nice collection of talent, it's not that CJ Prosise got bad. It's just he couldn't get on the field because he couldn't stay healthy. And it wasn't that Mike Davis was bad. I thought Mike Davis looked good last year.
He got hurt.
Yeah. So, when I look at the situation, Rashad Penny's a guy that, he can catch the ball, but he's either going out for a pass or he's running the football. And, maybe that gives you a little bit of run pass bind there, but that he can't pass protect. He doesn't break tackles as well as the data and analysts they point to. They talk about forced tackles. But all I know is that every time I watched several games, I rarely saw him run through someone actually wrapping his lower leg. He couldn't run through it, So I guess if he forced a missed tackle, is that, somebody slapping him on the leg and that counting? Because he certainly he was certainly a leader in yards after contact, but as we talked about, that's a faulty stat. That it artificially inflates the number if you just happen to be elusive and fast. And he is elusive and fast, and he can catch, and he's got great vision. So I'm happy with all those things, but I just don't. I'm with you. It's like when I look at this, he's the last of my first tier running backs, and if I could get him at the end of the first round, fine by me.
Yeah, I
Happy.
got him at 13, but that's with Roquan Smith because I include IDPs. And I think I may even have Tremaine Edmonds ahead of him too. So exactly, end of the first round. And not ahead of Lamar Jackson and
No.
not ahead of Kirk. And I'll give more the benefit of the doubt, although if you take Penny over more, but you're not gonna have that choice. Really quick on Lamar Jackson, because we could go on at length about Lamar Jackson. But regardless of what you think of Jackson's range of outcomes, whether you think he's a 40% likelihood of hitting, or a 50% likelihood of hitting, or a 60% likelihood of hitting, his likelihood of hitting is not that far below Mayfield and Darnold and Rosen and Allen. Not to the discrepancy in the draft picks. And the last I checked in fantasy football, when a quarterback can contribute, I don't know, 600, 800 rushing yards before he gets out of bed, and who knows how many touchdowns, then that is a massive, thanks Rich Rebar, the Konami code, the cheat code. Running quarterbacks. Remember what Colin Kaepernick was doing with the Chip Kelly 49ers when he was, look, even if Lamar Jackson is a mediocre at best passer, which he can be a lot better than that, then he's still going to be a top 6. He'll be the best. Lamar Jackson will be the best fantasy quarterback in this class. I feel very comfortable saying that. The only way that's not going to happen is if he's like Robert Griffin III and gets injured, loses his confidence, and his career just doesn't play out. So whatever you think about Lamar Jackson, it seems to me like I just don't understand, Matt, when I see fantasy rookie draft rankings that have the Lamar Jackson anything but the number 1 quarterback, even if you're not a Lamar Jackson believer.
He's number 2 on my board, but he's in my top 10. And that's because I like Josh Rosen that much, and I think people are crazy for what they put him through. But I would say that in addition to what they put Rosen through, I will say what they put Jackson through. I'm really just flipping tired of seeing, especially after the draft, people talk about Lamar Jackson and his quarterback development as if he's arriving to the Baltimore facility on a short yellow bus. Because it's anything but the truth. If anything, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold could get on that bus and would be in the back of that bus before Lamar Jackson on a number of levels. You can talk about accuracy all you want, but Lamar Jackson played in the pro style set. Lamar Jackson did shifts. Lamar Jackson hangs in the pocket better than those other two. He knows how to create like a pro style quarterback. And oh yeah, by the way, yeah, he can get up and run for 600 to 800 yards if he needs to. And if that's left open, and it's because of what he does. He's more Steve Young-like than he is Robert Griffin-like, or he is Colin Kaepernick-like, or even Michael Vick-like. And the thing is that my biggest fear about him is that the NFL team that he's with, I don't think they will. Even though bringing in Robert Griffin scared me a little bit and it still scares me a little bit that they might, is that they're looking at Lamar Jackson like he's the short yellow bus quarterback in this particular draft, and that they're going to use him the way that Mike Shanahan horribly exploited Robert Griffin's game. I mean, it was great for fantasy owners and it was great for Washington for 1 year, but it was clear they didn't want him. We look at it in hindsight, and it's very clear that Shanahan didn't want him, and Shanahan was up to his same old tricks that he was in Denver, and he basically had that guy laying beneath the surface, and he did what he could to basically wear the other one out, either emotionally, mentally, or physically. And so when I look at that, I mean, it's to me, I don't think this team's going to do that. I think they know what they got in him. And who cares if he can't communicate a whiteboard plays in a certain way that, maybe someone who was an account exec would give a presentation on a conference call. He knows the plays. He understands how to communicate what he needs to on the field, and he retains that information and sees it on the field well in action. He's an action guy. He doesn't need to be, he doesn't need to be a conference speaker or a QB coach. So right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think he has the highest upside. I just like Rosen's floor just a little bit more.
Well, and whether it's Rosen or Jackson, and wasn't there that famous story too about Brett Favre? What's cover two? You know, what do you mean?
Exactly.
What do you mean cover two?
Dan Marino had literally no Wonderlic score to speak of. Steve McNair had no Wonderlic score to speak of. They were MVPs of the league. All three of those guys you just mentioned.
And what you see with and this is dangerous, Matt, with you and I talking about topics like this. So I'll try not to get off too much on a tangent. But you see the stuff coming out about Rosen, and whether it's Rosen or Lamar Jackson or any player that the NFL unfairly pigeonholes. And it doesn't have to be about your race. It doesn't have to be about your religion. It doesn't have to be about your socioeconomic background, which, as in the cases of Rosen, you see it doesn't matter. You can't win. You grow up poor in the hood, and then that's going to get you characterized one way. You grow up rich, that'll get you characterized. It is, and the NFL is not unique in any fashion. And I this is where you would cue Matt Waldman talking about working in a call center and corporate culture and the idea of what kinds of ideas sometimes are difficult to put a stake through the heart of. But when you hear them talk about Josh Rosen and you see things like, oh, the 3-car garage and the long driveway, don't recruit kids that have a 3-car garage and a long driveway, and the litany of players, quarterbacks who grew up with the 3-car garage and the long driveway, who ended up being successes that you never heard that brought up about. It just shows you when these arguments are chosen, and more importantly, when these arguments are chosen within league circles at all, and then make it to the public eye, it's just outmoded backwards thinking. And may the Arizona Cardinals be rewarded for being forward thinking. But being forward thinking, looking at these destinations, Matt, I'll give you a chance to think about this as it was going into rookie drafts. And what I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite fits, one of my favorite landing spots where kind of the question I asked you about Christian Kirk, a landing spot where I said, oh, I like this. I like this a lot. And before the rookie draft, before the NFL rookie draft, I already had in my mind the idea of I'm going to try to reserve a 2nd round pick and a 3rd round pick, maybe 2 picks between 20 and 30 for Kiki QT, and I won't talk about QT, although if Will Fuller can't, yeah, and Nyheim Hines. Oh, Nyheim Hines in Indy. And what I thought was fascinating here was after every day of the draft, you got the hot take articles. I wrote one myself after the first day of the draft, stock up, stock down for veterans. And after 2 days of the draft for Marlon Mack, it was looking good. It's looking really good. And then you get not just Nyheim Hines, but Jordan Wilkins. And the team also still likes Robert Turbin. And while this is a team, Frank Reich coming directly from Philadelphia, where they used 4 running backs, they're going to use 4 running backs again in Indy. But Nyheim Hines, and I was comparing him to Chris Thompson before the draft. I think he can be more than Chris Thompson has been for Washington. And you look at Indianapolis, and I also is Chris Ballard an RSP subscriber? I don't know, but he, or at least a fantasy football player, because he understood this was a team that had massive needs at running back and wide receiver coming into the draft, and they didn't take one in the first 2 days, and they still got Deion Kane and Darius Fountain. They still got Nyheim Hines and Jordan Wilkins. And if, knock on wood, just for all of us, for not just for Colts fans, for football fans, that Andrew Luck comes back to being Andrew Luck. But you just give me T.Y. Hilton to stretch the field, Jack Doyle, Eric Ebron to work the middle of the field, and then you have Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni able to move these pieces around, just like Frank Reich was part of big success with the Eagles. And I see Nyheim Hines as much like when things were clicking in Washington, a big play receiving running back, and the kind of running back that can be set up where his per touch value might be the best of any running back in the league. And Hines talked about how teams were working him out as a receiver, running the route tree. And Hines and QT, look, I don't care what the 40 time was. The 2 fastest offensive players in this draft were Hines with the ball in their hands or like running under the ball, were running away from guys, it was Hines and QT.
Well, it's a great point about the Colts offense, and I really like that. And it's kind of funny because I'm not quite as high on Hines as everybody else, and it kind of explains a little bit. It's fun to hear the explanation as I've been going through mock drafts and going, "Dang, people are picking this guy high." I mean, I have him in my third tier of backs with a lot of good names there. But it's the crowded situation. I still think they're going to give Mac at least an opportunity to fail before they, or an opportunity to succeed. And if he's talented enough that if he can hold on to the ball and if he gets a little bit better at decision making, Hines may have trouble getting onto the field in that point. So, and Hines is Hines has a lot of trouble hanging onto the ball as well. That's one of his big boo-boos there and issues with his game. So I'm waiting for him to shore that up some. But yeah, to me, he kind of reminds me of a mix of, Thompson and Charlie Garner and Ronnie Hillman and kind of guys like that. And I actually have Jordan Wilkins rated ahead of him because I like, but that's me because again, I like the interior runners and Quentin Nelson. Oh my God, we didn't even talk. I mean, we don't talk about non-skill players, but if there was the best player in the draft who might not have been a skill player, it would be Quentin Nelson. I mean, and the fact that now they've shored up that line a little bit by getting him, and you're going to run behind that dude pulling. Yeah, I don't care who the running back is. Robert Turbin might look a lot better, running behind Quentin Nelson. But the point is that it is crowded. It's an interesting scenario, but I have Wilkins and Hines rated within like 2 spots of each other. I just gave Wilkins a little bit of the nod. But QT, I got to talk about QT because I know you've loved him, and I have too. I haven't talked much about it, but think about this. Clemson's offense always uses the tight end or the slot receiver. They love to throw in the middle of the field. Kiki QT at Texas Tech was a slot receiver most of the time, ran deep patterns from the slot, was very good matching up, running those deep routes. But what people don't talk about is how absolutely incredible he is in the middle of the field on tight window throws, especially tight window throws when they're improvised plays where he's finding the opening, getting to the open area in traffic and making a very difficult play because he worked with who may wind up being the best improvising quarterback in the NFL within the next 3 to 5 years in Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he was the go-to guy in that offense because Mahomes is like, I can make that throw. I mean, you want me to throw that camel through the eye of the needle? Yeah, I can do that. And Kiki QT is going to be on the other side with a big cargo net to catch it. I mean, it's like that was kind of some of the impossible plays that you saw. He has all the training he needs to get open for Deshaun Watson. And Bruce Ellington was what is the idea of what you saw with them kind of using that pre-snap motion and using him on some, corner routes and sail routes and seam routes, but also over the middle. And Ellington, we hoped would become Kiki QT. Kiki QT is already in the mix to be this guy. I would not be shocked at all. And his fellow alumnus, the wide receiver coach for Texans, Wes Welker, and he's been working with Welker since for a while, not even just before he got drafted. So this team knows what they've gotten him. And I would not be shocked at all if basically what they do is every NFL team and scout and coach is going to be over preparing for Will Fuller. And that's going to be great because Will's only going to be relied upon to drop 2 balls a game as opposed to dropping 6. And that's going to allow Kiki QT to be able to fill that gap really as Will stretches the field and he gets to play outfielder more, which is good because if you let Will Fuller play outfielder where he can turn his back to the ball and not have to track it and just catch it because he's outrun the defense and Deshaun Watson did all the hard work, he can catch those. It's the ones where he's got to track the ball over his head or be on the move and make a pro-style catch where he struggles a little bit more. Kiki QT doesn't, and that's going to really open up this offense. So I expect him to be no worse than a number 3 fantasy wide receiver for his career, if not a lot higher.
Well, and think of Juju Smith-Schuster last year, where, oh, yeah, he's coming into a good pass offense, but there's already established Martavis Bryant and Antonio Brown. But we forget in the offseason how fluid, how mercurial these situations can be, where talent creates opportunity. And QT, I like how you mentioned Wes Welker there. And I'll just also add, because this is one of the other players that I would I don't know if I would really necessarily pound the table or stand on the table, but I didn't understand why Jordan Akins wasn't getting more pub as in fantasy circles, as the kind of player we look for at tight end in fantasy football. And the Texans saw something in them that they liked. I thought he was the best vertical tight end, the best seam ripper in this draft. And
he's
now
my number 3 guy on my board.
Well, and it's because Dallas Goedert going to Philadelphia. There goes the air out of the balloon. Ooh, Hurst to Baltimore, but then Andrews to Baltimore. There goes the air out of the balloon. You know, it's just Jasicki to Miami. Somebody's gonna take him before I'm ready to take him.
The wall, head banging against the wall, because that's a risk reward ratio there. Think about this. Think about the players Miami's picked. They've picked Thomas Duarte, a nice athlete who's kind of stiff and only more of a receiver. Michael Egnew, a nice athlete who's tall and high cut and stiff, but can catch the ball, but never did anything. Oh, you know, then you look at who they have. Oh, Gavin Escobar. They're just banging their head against the wall, doing the same thing over again. The only thing they got right is they brought in Anthony Fasano, because he can block, who can teach fellow alumnus Durham Smythe to actually be their number 1 tight end, and he can actually catch. Jasecki, to me, he's got that high risk reward quotient to me, where he's like, it's kind of in limbo for me. Like, I have him rated about 24 picks lower than where everyone else is picking him, but I understand how he could succeed. But then there's Ryan Tannehill, who I haven't seen him have success with the tight end since he's been in the NFL. So it may break the mold, but I'm with you with Akins.
Yeah, I like Akins. And also what I really like about this is I'd love to look at the draft through the lens of winning your division. I think that teams look at it that way. And, okay, well, you know, Jalen Ramsey can cancel out DeAndre Hopkins. AJ Boye can cancel out Will Fuller. It's going to cancel out QT.
Yeah.
DJ Hayden, give me QT. Give me QT in that game. Give me QT to catch 8 or 9 balls in that game against Jacksonville. So that's going to be so much fun. You mentioned Wes Welker and Kiki QT. Another interesting piece of information came out about a player in this draft. And I know over the years, Matt, we've talked about a lot of rookie drafts, a lot of players, and I can't help it. I can't stay away from the risk reward propositions. I feel like in rookie drafts, I love reserving at least 1 pick for that player. That well, I mean, it's just that one that player. And look, I didn't see what everybody else saw. I'm not saying when I watched Antonio Callaway, I saw the explosiveness, I saw the playmaking ability. I didn't see a lot coming into sharp focus as a receiver, but I saw the raw materials. Then he tests positive at the combine. And despite that, the Browns not just take him in the 4th round, but move up to take him in the 4th round. They wake up John Dorsey wakes up Saturday morning and says, I've got to get Antonio Callaway. They move up to take him. And this is the same John Dorsey that made good with Marcus Peters, made good with Tyreek Hill. But then you find out that Antonio has been working with Antonio Callaway meet Antonio Brown. I'm getting sucked in. Now, I got sucked in a little bit with Joe Williams and James Conner last year, but those were more situation-based upside. This seems more talent ceiling-based upside. And if you were to ask me, who could I pick out of the NFL for a receiver that needs to get it, have the light bulb go on, of if you just work, you can be one of the best, it would be Antonio Brown. How did your view of Antonio Callaway change after everything we learned in that last week before the draft, good and bad?
Not a ton yet, but I do agree with you on that this is different than the Joe Williams scenario from last year, I do think that when you watch him on the field, there's an intuitive understanding of how to play the game. And, whether it's transitioning from receiver to runner, special teams, blocking, understanding how to get open in a zone, the routes that he did know how to run, he ran pretty well. So there's a lot going for him in that regard, even though I didn't have him rated very highly. And I still don't have him rated as highly as probably most will. But I think part of the caution for me is if there's any bias for me, it's that I'm biased against the Browns for the fact that I just haven't seen them get it together yet since they've since the body snatchers invaded Cleveland. So I'm waiting. I'm really waiting for them to show up and say, no, we're not the aliens. We're actually real human beings here, and we understand football. So if they do that, Callaway might be that type of pick. And the fact that he's working with Brown is a fantastic thing. But I've seen, I've also seen, Dwayne Bowe work with Larry Fitzgerald, and that didn't seem to catch either. Even that, so it's like ultimately you can have the greatest teachers, but if you aren't really ready to go, it doesn't matter. So I understand the risk. I would not argue anyone for taking the chance on him. But at the same time, for me, it's a little bit more wait and see. But if you're the wait and see is, the third or fourth round, if you could get him, then that's great. There are some folks who are taking him earlier, and I have him, I have him as a fourth round pick at this stage. So yeah,
it's that point in your rookie draft, third, fourth round. Take QT first, okay? But once you get him in your third round, then you take a swing for the fences. I know you had to. I know we exchanged notes, and you had to be excited to see Boston Scott land with New Orleans. But
that was shocking.
Well, at that point in the draft, I think that you were one of the first, at least publicly, to identify the traits and traits married to football skills in Scott's game that I'm sure is what New Orleans saw. And they don't have a running back like that right now. I mean, he fits in, gives a little different look than Ingram, a little different look than Kamara, or than now Edmonds, joined by his 2 first-round pick brothers in the NFL, Trey Edmonds. But what about other players, like late round or even undrafted free agents? And give me a name or two. And this always becomes situational stuff, because sometimes it can just be looking at a depth chart and seeing where someone lands. Like, I'm not sure that a year or two from now, and the good teams throw out draft position. So I have a feeling that when San Francisco watches Richie James and they watch Dante Pettis, that they may forget who they took in the second round and who they took in the 7th round. So you have an undrafted free agent or two, or a 6th or 7th round pick that people might be overlooking, but come training camp, come preseason, they won't.
Sure. And I actually think that they'll wind up starting both those guys you mentioned in San Francisco, and sooner than later. And I wouldn't be surprised if Trent Taylor, as everyone's talking about, winds up getting supplanted by Richie James. So it will be an interesting scenario there. Guys that I really like that just kind of jumped off the page, Ryan Nall in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that in a couple years we might be, especially the way that they're running Ryan, Jordan Howard into the ground, we might see Nall, stick with that team. So he's a fascinating look there. Then Byron Pringle out of Kansas State. He has a little bit of work to do with how he uses his hands, but man, he's a good route runner, and he is excellent after the catch. He's going to stick on special teams, and there's a whole slew of receivers whose contracts are up next year, and I think that he's a guy that's going to be interesting. A guy by the name of George Baker on Twitter, who's an RSP subscriber. I don't know if you're a Football Guys listener, but I bet you are. I want to thank him for recommending T.O. Redding over in Detroit to take a look at. Said it reminded him of Marvin Jones, and boy, was he right. He's out of Bowling Green, second team All-MAC, and he literally looks like a 10-pound lighter Marvin Jones who could add some of that weight, ball catch radius, speed, ability to run routes, run after the catch, releases. He looked like a player. So I was really fortunate, happy to see some of that. Other guys that I want to mention here that I think are interesting for us to look at. I never saw him until this week, and it was Alex Magoo, a player, the quarterback from Florida International, who the Seahawks took. And man, I can't believe I didn't see him. He is mobile. He's athletic. He has the arm to throw the ball with that velocity you want to see across the hash at 30, 35 yards. He is confident at placing the ball on the move on and off script. He's someone that understands how to read a defense and bait a defense, and he's confident in throwing into tight windows, on a regular basis. And he does it against quality competition. And I'm just kind of surprised that I haven't heard anything about him other than, of course, from Mark Schofield over at Inside the Pylon. He did something on him as soon as I looked him up, and I was watching some of his tape, and I thought, well, there's Mark. Of course, Mark's got something on him, and he was good. I ended up putting him. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he winds up being a potential starting quarterback in the league. I mean, he's good enough that I would, in deep dynasty leagues, I'm going to be adding him to my drafts. Cam Petway. I like Cam Petway. I think he's a tough dude. He knows how to run. He's not Ron Dane. He's actually a power runner with some quickness. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he works his way up the depth chart to back up Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Rock Thomas and Mike Boone and Cameron Petway, the three. Minnesota's undrafted free agent class was better than some teams' third day of their draft. And there's so many. This was such a deep class at running back and wide receiver. There's so many names. Ralph Webb in New England. Jeff Wilson in San Francisco is interesting. I know the 49ers really liked him. And you're also looking at depth charts. Who does he have to beat out? Joe Williams. It's Mac Brown as the number 3 running back in Minnesota right now. I don't think that Kansas City has a true. Charcandrick West has been competent, but I think they can improve. And Darrell Williams, following in the footsteps of Spencer Ware in Kansas City. Houston didn't take a running back. They've got Dante Foreman. They've got Lamar Miller. They did re-sign Alfred Blue after the draft. But, Terry Swanson, a highly productive back. The Jets got Trenton Cannon, a small school.
Oh,
yeah.
I've got one that the Jets got too, and he's interesting. His name is Ryan Green. Ryan Green might be the next Willie Parker. He was backed up. He was the backup to Devonta Freeman, to Carlos Williams, Dalvin Cook, and Cam Akers at Florida State. But he was a top prospect himself. When you watch him actually play, good vision, great downhill cuts, and he can beat you to the outside, and he's an excellent pass receiver. And I would not be shocked at all if that dude climbs the depth chart and they feel good enough that they go, yeah, Rawls is good, but whatever. Yeah, Elijah McGuire was good, but whatever. This guy can play. So that's another one that I would add. And then my sleeper of the draft, which is Josh Jackson, arriving as a 7th round pick. Melvin Gordon, workhorse, been good, but has Melvin Gordon been the break? Was Melvin Gordon the most hyped back of his class?
Yeah.
I think he was. Has he delivered anywhere near as a breakaway player that people described him to be? I don't think so. So if Justin Jackson can show some big play ability right away, I wouldn't be surprised if he earned some playing time.
And part of that Kyle Posey article was that if Royce Freeman was on the board for the Chargers in the 3rd round, they would have taken Royce Freeman. So they're looking ahead, and I don't think you're going to see a second contract. I like that call for Justin Jackson. I also want to call some attention, and you can tell folks, and if you're new to the show, like this is where Matt and Cecil and I geek out. We love the preseason, and I'm going to be very interested in that number 5. One of the things that over the years I've filed away is every wide receiver on the depth chart for a good productive pass offense is worth knowing. So we're going to watch in Green Bay. So let me back up. First, I'm going to say that you can tell how excited I am. Houston has, I think, the top outside backup receiver in Houston right now. Oh, is it the other Chris Thompson? I mean, I don't even know who it is. They have 3 slot receivers in QT and Miller and Ellington, and they've got Hopkins and Fuller. But they brought in Jester Weah, one of my favorites, the size, strength, the catch radius, and speed. And Vincent Smith, who is from Limestone and makes the circus catches, some length, some speed, big playability. And I feel like, with Will Fuller and his injury history, so I'm looking forward to that battle. I'm looking forward to what Green Bay is going to do, but I want to do a lead in before I toss to you a larger thing. Because what's going to be fun about Green Bay, of course, is it's Aaron Rodgers receivers. Who's starting on the outside opposite Devontae Adams? Oh, yeah. Geronimo Allison. Yancey. Yeah, D'Angelo Yancey. But it could be Equiminius St. Brown. It could be Jamon Moore. It could be Marcus Valdes-Scantling. They're all different. I think Jamon Moore has the tremendous quickness for a big receiver. Valdes-Scantling has the speed. Equiminius St. Brown, also not quite as fast in a straight line as Valdes-Scantling, but you saw him make some plays with Deshaun Kaiser. And any one of those guys, I think, could be starting this year. Yeah. And we'll watch. That's going to be fun to watch in the preseason. But what was really interesting was one of the things that I love about the draft is, especially when you get into it the way we do year after year after year, you notice the arc of the NFL follow the arc of the draft, although the draft maybe is a year or two ahead or a year or two behind, depending on how good the organization is. So one example, I think, for instance, would be Bo Scarborough. So 10 years ago, Bo Scarborough was what, a third-round pick? Second-round pick?
At least.
The exact same player. And we're not talking about light years, just 10 years ago. Bo Scarborough and what he offers would have been valued on a second-day level. Now, he's a seventh-round pick. Big receivers. It wasn't that long ago that the fantasy community, back in the early days of fantasy Twitter, was part of a big civil war, if you will. I'm over dramatizing it because I like to over dramatize things. No, but it was the beginning. And hey, analytics and algorithms and trying to find filters has added so much to the conversation in fantasy football. Sure. But one of the early ones was size matters. As receivers get bigger, they score X percentage more touchdowns. So take big receivers. What's fascinating about this year's draft is that if you look at the receivers that measured at 6'4" or taller at the combine, I think that they all lasted until, I think St. Brown went to the late 6th round. And these were combine invites. And only Jaleel Scott. And what's funny is we talked about Jaleel Scott before the draft, and I said, I like Jaleel Scott, but he doesn't necessarily play as big as his size could allow him to. And if you watched Marcel Aitman or Simi Cobbs or Alan Lazard, these guys went undrafted. And these were the guys that played like the big post up, contested catch, go up and win the fade receiver that the NFL loved. These guys went undrafted. St. Brown, who, whether I won't play special teams, his dad, late 6th round for a player with the NFL, usually if you have that kind of length and that kind of speed, they'll take you in the 3rd or 4th round and say, well, let's see if we can make it work just on that alone. The NFL, I think, made a very clear statement, all 32 teams, that size doesn't matter at wide receiver anymore. If anything, size doesn't even have a place for these guys to go undrafted. So, but Green Bay, on the other hand, said, give us all the big receivers. What did you think as you watched Auden Tate, watch these guys just fall down the board for that 3rd day?
I was pleasantly shocked because these were all guys I had rated low, and I was thinking that, like every other year where I have certain guys maybe rated a little lower than others, that that the NFL was once again going to be about projectable players, because they often tend to draft projections at the wide receiver position just the way that you described. And it's just kind of, to them, they feel like that there's some magic formula that's going to happen, that if they pour the water on the bean, it's going to grow into the beanstalk. And it doesn't always happen that way. And I think that when you look at a lot of it had to do with the spread offenses. When you realize that the influx of the spread has created this dynamic where slot receivers matter more, And it's not just Wes Welker slot receivers. It's Michael Thomas slot receivers. It's Cooper Kupp slot receivers, guys who are over 6 feet, who are over 200 pounds, who may not have great speed, but have terrific short area quickness and acceleration. And they can also play outside. Juju Smith-Schuster, you look at all of that, and what that tells you is that they need guys who can run routes. They need guys with acceleration who can get off press coverage and also make the right decisions against zone coverage. So has to be some advancement there. And some of the complaints that I've heard from some people inside the league about some of these bigger guys before the draft was that you would think that with all this instruction and all these camps that these guys go to, that there would be more refined wide receivers out there. And I think the more every time I heard that, it was directed at one of these big projectable guys who just basically leaned on their size. And they've been raised in this environment basically where they were like, well, I'm tall, I'm strong, I'm fast. When are you going to give me my privilege? And the NFL said, no privilege for you today. And that's basically where they are. And Green Bay was smart because I think they just looked around and said, we've identified some tall guys that we'd like to take. And I wouldn't be surprised if they tell you, we didn't think we'd get all three of these guys. We were just looking for one of them, but they just kept falling. So we just kept taking them at these rounds where it was a good value for us in this respect. And I wouldn't be surprised if Valdez-Scantling turns out to be the best one of the bunch if he's the type of guy that will work at his game, because he's the most in terms of projectables, he's the best one in terms of the old school, what you're looking for. St. Brown's the most polished right now, but I don't think he's going to grow as much in terms of his conceptual feel for the game and how he puts everything together, because I think he has problems with it already. And I think Moore's that guy. I love his quickness, and you can find a way to use him. I think he's going to be I think that he'll be a factor on some level. But yeah, it's fascinating how this has all worked out. And that was probably one of the most not pleasant to see guys go where they, fall, because you don't want to see someone having expectations and they end up being busted. But it was pleasant to see that the NFL was, when you start evaluating this game, that what you think is valuable, the NFL thinks is valuable too.
Yes, and also, I feel like we could probably go for 3 or 4 hours tonight. We got the juices flowing. I know, as we're both really in it. And I also want to say that I loved Dylan Cantrell speaking of Texas Tech receivers, going to the Chargers. Mike Williams, my back. Tyrell Williams, restricted free agent. Travis Benjamin's going to get expensive soon.
Yep.
And there's Dylan Cantrell. So it's going to be fast.
Like Jordan Lasley to Baltimore.
Yeah.
Too. I think they got it right with him.
Well, and Lasley with Lamar Jackson. Because that's the thing, is you're starting to project with these quarterback picks, you're starting to project. That's why, Jarvis Landry all of a sudden, back to life as a 100-catch guy with Baker Mayfield, and so on and so forth. The NFL draft, pleasantly surprising Matt Waldman since 2018. And on some levels, that's good, though. It's good because I swear we've had hundreds of conversations about the draft, and it's the first time that we can say, hey, and the NFL actually seems to be catching up to things that we've been talking about. And not that we're often catching up to the NFL, like everybody out there. What makes the Football Guys community so great, the passion, the camaraderie, the shared experience, and wanting to continue to capture that elusive thing that as soon as we feel like we captured it, it gets away from us again, just like it does for the NFL. So we love coming back to that. I'm sure Cecil and Gene will be back next week, but I love the opportunity to get to grab the wheel, and for Matt and I to get to riff, and for y'all to give us the opportunity to do that. Thank you so much. And everything's back. Team player pages are coming online soon. Everything is coming back to life. All the flowers, it's springtime, and football around the corner. So much to talk about. We like doing it for you. As always, stay classy.